What did your husband do to destroy your intimacy? I don't understand men. He told me that he wasn't attracted to me anymore after 10 years of marriage and 3 children. This was 3 years ago. It sent me into deep depression because of the shock. He didn't want divorce because he said he still loved me and loved being with me. So I agreed that he would get a girlfriend, someone he works with. Now for the past few months, maybe a year, he has been making remarks about me being beautiful. I ignored it because he told me he wasn't attracted to me anymore. Then he started to talk about wanting me again. I didn't agree and reminded him that he said he wasn't attracted to me anymore and that he had a girlfriend. He said that he would end it for me if I wanted because he made a mistake. I said no and reminded him that our deal was that if he wanted a girlfriend, he couldn't have me too. Then he broke up with his girlfriend and made it sound like he was doing it for me. Last weekend we were together because he said that he loved and missed me. It was the worst thing I've ever felt. I cried for days afterwards. I am angry that I still love him after all this. I want a divorce because of it. He doesn't get it. He said I didn't want a divorce when he left me, but now I want a divorce even though I said I loved him. But he doesn't understand that it is because I love him that I want a divorce. He broke me. I agreed to stay because I was weak and couldn't stand living without him. I wanted my family with me. I couldn't stand living without my children, tucking them to bed every night. I wanted the safety, the one big home for all of us, and he agreed to my only condition, that he would never cross that boundary again. But we broke that condition that worked as a fragile scaffolding made out of paper, and with the littlest touch, my sanity and false sense of safety are collapsing. But of course he doesn't understand why I stayed when he didn't want me, but now I want to leave when he says he wants me back. If he did understand, he would probably not have done this to me in the first place. I still remember that night like a scar carved into my memory. His words, "I'm not attracted to you anymore," were like a blade, clean and sharp, severing something inside me that I didn't know could be broken. It wasn't anger that consumed me first, it was disbelief. I laughed nervously, waiting for him to take it back, to say it was stress talking or that he was joking in some cruel, tone-deaf way. But his face stayed still, calm, even gentle. That made it worse. If he had shouted, if he had thrown it at me in anger, I could have dismissed it as a moment of cruelty. But no, he was steady, resolved. He didn't want a divorce, he assured me. He loved me. He loved our children. He loved us. He just didn't love me in that way anymore. I was 30 years old with 3 kids under the age of 10, and suddenly I felt 80. I felt ancient, discarded, like a book that had been read too many times and left to gather dust. Nights became the worst. I would lie in bed beside him, his body warm but distant, my heart a drum of panic in the dark. How do you share a bed with a man who has just confessed that your skin, your hair, your laughter no longer ignite anything in him? I cried silently, so the children wouldn't hear. I told myself I was strong, that I would endure, but endurance is a cruel replacement for love. Then came the solution. He told me he didn't want to break up the family, that he wanted to stay married, but that he needed something more. I thought he meant therapy or counseling, or some effort to rekindle what we had lost. But no, his idea of more was someone else. He wanted permission, a girlfriend. He promised it would mean nothing, that it was just physical, that it wouldn't touch what we had. I should have screamed. I should have slammed the door, called a lawyer, and never looked back. But when you are weak, when you are afraid of losing not just your husband, but your home, your children's laughter in the hallway, the safety of the life you built, you do desperate things. And so I agreed. The woman was someone from his office. I remember seeing her once at a holiday party, younger than me, with hair that seemed to shine under the cheap office lights. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I had made peace with it. But every night, when he was late, I would stare at the ceiling and picture them together. The jealousy wasn't even sharp. It was dull, heavy, like carrying a stone in my chest everywhere I went. For 3 years, this arrangement ate at me like acid. I smiled for the children, cooked dinners, packed lunches, kept the house spinning. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, everything had. And then, like a cruel joke, he began to turn back to me. He started calling me beautiful again, his eyes lingering on me in ways they hadn't in years. At first, I brushed it off, thinking he was just being polite. Then it grew persistent. He wanted me again. He said he had made a mistake. He was ready to come back, as if I was some safe harbor he could return to after his adventure. But by then, something inside me had hardened. When he touched me last weekend, when he whispered that he missed me, my body betrayed me. Instead of warmth, I felt cold. Instead of comfort, I felt grief. I let him hold me, and I hated every second. When it was over, I sat in the bathroom and cried until my chest ached, wondering how love could become this grotesque parody of itself. I want a divorce now, not because I stopped loving him, but because I still do. and loving him means knowing that he has destroyed the foundation of us. Loving him means recognizing that I can't rebuild what he shattered. He doesn't understand this. He thinks love should be enough, but love without trust is a cage, and I refuse to keep living inside it. In the beginning, everything was different. Sometimes I wonder if I romanticize it, if memory is tricking me, polishing the rough edges of our early years. But no, I remember the way he looked at me then, like I was the only person in the room, the only voice he wanted to hear. We were young, broke, and reckless, yet somehow happier. Our apartment was so small the kitchen table doubled as a desk, and the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's television at night. Still, it was ours. We laughed at our own poverty, called our mismatched furniture vintage, and believed that love alone could keep us afloat. When our first child was born, he cried harder than I did. He held that tiny body in his hands and swore he would spend his life protecting both of us. For a while, he meant it. He was gentle, attentive, always making me tea during late-night feedings, rubbing my shoulders when exhaustion bent me forward. Those were the years when I thought marriage was exactly what people promised: partnership, warmth, family. But small cracks began to appear, almost invisible at first. They weren't about infidelity, or betrayal, or even fights. They were about distance. He worked more hours, came home later. When he was home, he was tired, his eyes glued to his phone or the television. I excused it. He was providing, after all. But slowly, intimacy became a stranger in our house. We still loved each other, but our conversation shrank into fragments about bills, schedules, groceries. Then came our second child, and later the third. The house filled with toys, with noise, with chaos. And while I tried to hold on to the thread of us, he seemed to drift further away. At first, I thought it was just exhaustion, the endless routine of parenthood grinding us down. But then one night, when I reached for him, he pulled away. Not angrily, just gently, almost apologetically. That was the first time I wondered if he still wanted me. I asked once, timidly, if he was happy. He smiled and said yes, but his eyes flickered away, and I knew that was the kind of lie people tell to avoid confrontation. After that, I stopped asking. It felt safer not to know. When he confessed years later that he wasn't attracted to me anymore, part of me realized I had known all along. I had felt it in every quiet rejection. Every night he turned his back to me in bed, but hearing the words out loud was a wound I couldn't ignore. Agreeing to the arrangement was my breaking point disguised as compromise. I told myself it was temporary, that maybe if he got whatever it was he thought he needed, he would come back to me whole. I told myself that keeping our family intact was more important than my pride. I convinced myself that love meant sacrifice, even if the sacrifice was my own self-worth. But the truth? It killed something inside me. Watching him leave the house on nights I knew weren't for work, lying awake in the bed we once shared, it hollowed me out. I smiled at the children, kept the laundry folded, the dinners warm, but inside I was ice. He never noticed, or maybe he did, and he didn't care. Now 3 years later, he says he wants me again. He says he made a mistake, and I keep asking myself, what exactly is it that he wants? The woman he once rejected, or the comfort of the life I built while he played elsewhere? He doesn't see that the woman he left behind is not the woman standing here now. He doesn't see that the version of me who once believed in unconditional forgiveness is gone. Sometimes I lie awake at night and think about the younger me, the one in that tiny apartment with mismatched furniture, who believed love was enough. What would she say if she saw me now? Would she pity me? Would she call me foolish? Or would she whisper that it's not too late to choose myself? I don't know yet. But I do know one thing. Whatever this marriage once was, it will never be that again. The thought of divorce used to terrify me. The word itself felt like failure, like an admission that I couldn't hold together what I had sworn before God, before my family, before myself. But lately, the word has started to feel less like a threat and more like a lifeline. I catch myself rehearsing it in my head, the conversations I'll need to have. How do you tell your children that the family they've always known is about to shatter? They're still young, and part of me wants to shield them from every ounce of pain. But another part knows they've already sensed the tension. Children notice more than we give them credit for. They see the way their father and I orbit each other like strangers in the same house. They hear the silence, the sharp tones, the lack of laughter. Sometimes, I wonder if staying together for the kids is more damaging than leaving. What kind of example am I setting if I show them that love means sacrificing your dignity, your boundaries, your joy? What will my daughters learn about how they deserve to be treated? What will my sons learn about the way to treat the women in their lives? The questions keep me awake at night, pressing down on me until the darkness feels unbearable. I try to remember the exact moment my trust finally cracked. Was it the night he told me, flatly, that he wasn't attracted to me anymore? Or was it later, when he came home smelling of someone else's perfume and insisted it was just a coworker's hug goodbye? Maybe it was the day he looked at me across the dinner table, our children laughing between us, and his eyes were vacant like he'd already left. But I think the real breaking point was when I agreed to let him have what he wanted, a girlfriend, because I was too weak to face the alternative. That was when I betrayed myself. I built a fragile scaffolding of conditions and rules, and I convinced myself it would hold. But it was paper thin, and deep down I knew it. Every time he crossed that line, every time he returned from her with the audacity to sit at my table, to kiss our children goodnight, I felt something inside me collapse. Now he says he wants me again. Now he says I'm beautiful, that he misses me, that he made a mistake. But he doesn't understand. It isn't about attraction anymore. It's about trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't knit itself back together just because someone decides they've changed their mind. I think about what it would mean to leave. The logistics, dividing assets, finding a new place to live, arranging custody schedules. The emotional toll, tears, confusion, maybe even resentment from the kids. But alongside the fear, I feel something else creeping in. Hope. Hope that maybe I could rebuild myself. Hope that maybe there's a version of me out there who isn't living under the weight of someone else's choices. Sometimes I imagine waking up in a quiet apartment, just me and the kids. The thought should feel lonely, but instead it feels like peace. No more waiting for him to choose me. No more bargaining away pieces of myself just to keep the illusion of a marriage intact. Just us, and maybe for the first time in years, just me. I know he won't understand. He already doesn't. To him, love is enough reason to stay, even if love has been twisted into something unrecognizable. He doesn't see that I'm not leaving because I stopped loving him. I'm leaving because I love him too much to keep letting him destroy me. And because finally I love myself enough to walk away. The decision to leave wasn't a sudden lightning strike. It was more like the steady drip of water wearing away stone. 1,000 little cuts, each one shallow enough to ignore at the time, but together bleeding me dry. By the time I admitted it out loud, even just to myself, I already knew there was no turning back. Still, knowing and doing are two very different things. I kept circling around the same fear. How do I tell him? How do I tell the kids? The words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. For weeks, I replayed the conversation in my head. Sometimes I was calm and resolute. Other times I was furious, finally unloading years of resentment. But no matter how many versions I rehearsed, the pit in my stomach remained. I decided to start small, to test the weight of the words on someone safe. My mother. She's not perfect. She has her own blind spots, her own history of sacrifice that borders on self-erasure. But she loves me, and she has always wanted more for me than she had for herself. I sat at her kitchen table one rainy afternoon, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea I wasn't drinking. I stared at the steam curling upward, trying to gather courage. Finally, I whispered it. Mom, I think I want a divorce. She didn't gasp. She didn't scold. She just nodded slowly, her eyes soft, like she'd been waiting for me to say it. I wondered how long you were going to keep holding on, she said. Her voice carried neither judgment nor surprise, only a kind of quiet sadness. I told her everything. The girlfriend, the broken promises, the nights of crying alone in the bathroom while he slept peacefully down the hall. The way his sudden declarations of love now felt like salt in the wound. She listened, never interrupting, letting me pour it all out until the words were spilling too fast for me to keep up with my own thoughts. When I finally stopped, breathless and shaking, she reached across the table and took my hand. You don't owe anyone your suffering, she said. Not even him, especially not him. Her words cracked something open inside me. It wasn't that I needed her permission, but hearing her acknowledge my pain without trying to minimize it gave me strength I didn't realize I'd been missing. The next step was harder. I confided in my closest friend, Emily. She's the kind of person who doesn't sugarcoat anything, and I knew she would tell me the truth, even if it hurt. When I told her, she didn't hesitate. You should have left years ago, she said bluntly. You've been surviving, not living. I've watched you disappear into this marriage piece by piece. It's time to come back. Her words stung because they were true, but they also gave me a strange sense of relief. It wasn't just in my head. Other people had noticed. Other people saw the cracks in my smile, the shadows under my eyes. That night, lying awake in bed next to the man who had once been my world, I realized something. I didn't need him to understand. I didn't need him to agree. The only person who needed to believe in this decision was me. So I began to plan, quietly, carefully, like someone drawing a map out of a maze. I started researching apartments, squirreling away small amounts of money, making lists of what the children would need. It felt both terrifying and liberating, like stepping out onto thin ice and daring to believe it might hold. And through it all, one thought pulsed steady in the back of my mind. I'm not doing this because I stopped loving him. I'm doing this because I still love myself. The night I finally told him, the air in the house felt thick, like even the walls were bracing for impact. The kids were asleep, their soft breathing filling the silence upstairs. Downstairs, only the kitchen light was on, casting long shadows across the room. He was at the table scrolling through his phone, completely unaware that our lives were about to split in two. I stood there for a long moment watching him. My heart pounded so hard I thought he might hear it. My palms were sweaty, my throat dry. But then I remembered my mother's words. You don't owe anyone your suffering, and Emily's blunt truth. You've been surviving, not living. Those voices gave me just enough courage to open my mouth. I want a divorce, I said. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. He looked up slowly, his face frozen in disbelief. For a second, I thought he hadn't heard me. Then he laughed, a short, humorless laugh. "You can't be serious," he said. "After everything? After I broke up with her for you? After I told you I wanted us again?" I nodded, my voice trembling but steady. "Yes, after everything, especially after everything." His expression darkened. "So let me get this straight. You didn't leave when I said I wasn't attracted to you anymore. You didn't leave when I had a girlfriend. But now, when I finally want you back, now you want a divorce?" His voice rose with each word, incredulous, almost angry. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I refused to look away. "That's exactly why. You don't get it. You broke me when you said those things, when you chose someone else, and now you think you can undo it just because you changed your mind. But I can't undo the way it made me feel. I can't unlive those nights crying alone. I can't unhear the words you said." He slammed his hand on the table. "This is insane. We have a family. We built a life. You're really going to throw it away because of some words?" I swallowed hard, my hands trembling at my sides. They weren't just words. They were the truth you gave me when you thought you didn't need me anymore. And I stayed because I was weak, because I couldn't stand the thought of losing everything at once. But I can't keep pretending. Loving you doesn't mean I have to keep destroying myself to stay with you? For a moment he was silent, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Then his face softened, his voice almost pleading. "But I love you. I've always loved you. I made a mistake. Don't I get a second chance?" I shook my head slowly, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "You had your chance. You had so many, and maybe you do love me in your way, but you don't respect me, you don't protect me, you don't see me, and I can't survive on love that keeps wounding me." The silence after that felt endless. He looked at me like I was a stranger, as if he couldn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. And maybe he couldn't, because for the first time in years, I wasn't bending, wasn't apologizing, wasn't trying to make it easier for him. I turned to leave the room, my legs heavy but steady. Upstairs, I peeked in on the kids, their little bodies curled safely under blankets. I whispered a promise to myself in that moment. I'll give them a mother who chooses dignity, even if it means tearing everything else apart. Behind me, I could hear him muttering to himself, disbelief thick in his voice. But I didn't go back. I couldn't. The decision was made, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The days after telling him were some of the hardest of my life. At first, he reacted with disbelief, as if my words had been a bluff I would take back once emotions cooled. But when I didn't retract them, something shifted. He stopped pleading and started sulking. He moved through the house like a storm cloud, slamming doors, muttering under his breath, sending me looks that cut deeper than anything he could say. I knew I had to start preparing, quietly, carefully. I didn't want to involve the children until I had something solid in place. So while they were at school or asleep, I began to research. I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter late at night, scrolling through rental listings, legal resources, forums for women who had gone through the same thing. Every click felt like both a betrayal and a lifeline. The thought of uprooting the kids from the only home they knew made my stomach churn. But the thought of raising them in a house filled with resentment, unspoken tension, and broken trust was worse. I had promised myself, standing by their bedsides that night, that I would choose dignity, even if it cost me stability. And dignity meant following through. I started with practical steps. I called a lawyer during my lunch break at work, whispering into the phone in the back of my car. My hands were shaking as I explained my situation, half expecting judgment, but the lawyer's voice was calm, matter of fact. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last," she said gently. "What matters is that you're thinking of what's best for you and your children. Let's start with what you want, and we'll work backwards." Her certainty gave me a kind of strength I hadn't realized I was missing. Back home, I began packing little things when he wasn't looking. Not suitcases, not boxes, that would have been too obvious, but small reminders that one day we would walk out. Important documents went into a folder I kept tucked at the back of my closet. A few cherished books and photo albums disappeared into bags at the bottom of the kids' toy bins. Even as I folded laundry or helped with homework, part of me was always planning, always preparing for the moment when leaving would no longer be an idea, but a reality. The hardest part was keeping a straight face around the kids. My oldest, ever perceptive, noticed something was off. One evening, while I was stirring pasta on the stove, she asked quietly, "Mom, are you and Dad mad at each other?" I froze for a second, the spoon trembling in my hand. I wanted to give her an answer that wouldn't burden her, but also wouldn't be a lie. So I said carefully, "Sometimes grown-ups have problems they need to work through, but no matter what, I love you more than anything. That will never change." She nodded, still worried, but accepted it. At night, when the house was quiet, I would lie awake replaying everything. The words he had said to me, the way I had felt so small, the way I had clung to scraps of affection even when I knew better. And I would remind myself that this exhaustion, this quiet grief, was temporary. Freedom would come. Healing would come. He must have sensed it too, even if he didn't want to admit it. One night, as I was folding laundry, he came into the room and stood in the doorway. His voice was soft, almost tired. "So this is it? You're really going to leave?" I didn't look up right away. My hands kept folding, one shirt after another, steadying me. "Yes." I said finally. I'm really going to leave. He sighed, a sound heavy with something between regret and bitterness. You're making a mistake. Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't. But for the first time in years, I felt like the choice was mine.